You're listening to the Inside the Mix podcast with your host, Marc Matthews.
Hello and welcome to the Inside the Mix podcast. I'm Marc Matthews, your host, musician, producer, and mix and mastering engineer. You've come to the right place if you want to know more about your favorite synth music artists, music engineering and production, songwriting, and the music industry. I've been writing, producing, mixing, and mastering music for over 15 years, and I want to share what I've learnt with you. Hey folks, if you're a new Inside the Mix podcast listener, welcome, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And if you're a returning listener, welcome back. At the time of this episode going live, we find ourselves in that weird limbo between Christmas and New Year. Now, I'm taking some downtime this week, and so this week's episode of the Inside the Mix podcast is from the archives and features Dan Cox of the brilliant Pensacola Mist. Episode 38 is one of my favourite Inside the Mix interviews and also an audience favourite. You can hear it referenced at the end of various podcast episodes by you, the listeners. If you want to know how to write modern synth-pop music and craft the perfect live show, this is the episode for you. However, before we dive into this week's episode, did you know that with a consistent songwriting schedule, not only will you progress as a producer, but you'll also release more music? Now, the reason why a lot of producers stagnate and release music sporadically is because they're disorganized and inefficient with their songwriting. So, I've created an amazing free tool called the Producer Growth Scorecard to help solve this very problem. This simple tool will help you gamify your songwriting so that you can see a direct correlation between your score and your release numbers. The Producer Growth Scorecard has helped to triple my songwriting in just 6 weeks. Let's see what it can do for you. Pick up your free Producer Growth Scorecard at www.marcmatthewsproducer.com. So hey folks, and welcome back to the Inside the Mix podcast. And in this episode, as usual, I'm always excited. I'm excited to welcome our guest today, Daniel Cox, is 1/3 of Pensacola Mist, who are a high-contrast synth-pop trio inspired by 80s synths and nostalgia. Known for their larger-than-life light show, powerhouse vocals, and electric on-stage energy. Love that description. And Dan's going to share the story behind Pensacola Mist, synth-pop songwriting, the ups and downs and of being in a band, and the new album, which will be out on the 15th of July. Dan, thanks for joining me today, and how are you?
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm great, thank you. Yeah, really looking forward to this too.
Hey, so I've been following you guys for a while online. I know we've been back and forth probably over the last year or so, I absolutely love your music. It's right up my street in terms of like synth music and synth pop and whatnot, man.
Brilliant.
I've been binging it this week, as I always do. So for the audience listening via the podcast now, this is a live episode being streamed on Facebook. So if you're listening to this retrospectively, join the Facebook community group. There is a link in the show notes, and you can then keep up to date on future live episodes. So we're going to look at the story behind Pensacola Mist. So what I want to start with, the first question for this particular episode, is the story behind the band. Well, actually, let's start with your own story. So your musical life leading up to Pensacola Mist.
Yeah, well, growing up, music wasn't like a huge part of my life. Like my mom and dad had some favorites and we would have them on cassette and listen to them mainly in the car and over. So there would be an album for maybe that would last us 2 years and I'd just know it inside out. So it was, whether it was my dad listening to Sting, I guess, in the 90s, or the Cranberries, and my mom listening to the Cause, so it's it's kind of like there'd be one tape for 18 months or so, and that would just get repeat. And other than that, there wasn't, I wasn't exposed to a lot of music. My granddad was in a folk band, and in fact, it still is. Disrespectful to say he was, just because I haven't seen them for a little while doesn't mean that he's just stopped. And so there's kind of like this folky influence that was the start of music for me, and kind of certainly the start of seeing it performed live, and that I would ask at the age of 7 or 8 to see them every time they performed, and it was probably just in the corner of a pub somewhere, or there was like a fete or something, and they were playing, and I would just ask to be there at every opportunity they could, because I just loved seeing it come together live, and that's kind of left a mark on me. I'm quite sure.
Amazing.
Yeah.
No, that's great. It's always great when you hear stories about how individuals have grown up with music and how it influences, and their parents getting involved with those influences as well. So with regards to music itself, is there like a seminal album or artist that sort of had a direct influence on you growing up?
Yeah, so that kind of continued that lack of exposure to lots of music, kind of, until through my teenage years. And one of the first times I remember music really kind of hitting me, um, and I'm sure this will come up with other people in synth pop and synthwave, but it was playing Grand Theft Auto Vice City and just falling in love with those songs of the 80s. I listened to Flash FM on repeat. In fact, I'd sometimes turn on that game, park the car up, and just have the car radio going so I could hear some of those tracks. And I was just like enamored by how fun it was and how light. And that's kind of, I guess, probably when I started checking out Top of the Pops 2 and stuff, and just seeing what other sort of 80s things I'd kind of missed. I guess actually a memory's just unlocked in my mind of buying, of my mum buying Black and White, the Michael Jackson track on cassette when I was probably like 4. I think I must have heard that on the radio and wanted that on. So that's sort of like, that sort of 80s, early 90s, but I guess mainly 80s stuff has just kind of been there in the background throughout the whole journey. But yeah, I think when that game came out and unlocked all these other sorts of things that I could hear and kind of delve into, it's bizarre that it would be a compilation from a video game that kind of starts it as something that unlocked it. But that was a real kick for me to kind of get me going. And then if I then started to discover a few more bands through some of my friends, and it was actually Block Party that took me through most of my teenage years.
Oh yeah.
Like that sort of smart indie rock, primarily based around Silent Alarm is still one of my favorite albums, and of course that's absolutely not synth in any way, but they do still like to play with guitars in a way through their loop pedals and their delays and things. So it's like kind of coming up with these different soundscapes out of something that everyone kind of starts with 2 guitars and a bass and drums, and see what can you do with that. So that's been something for me. But if I had to pick a band, and sometimes I don't tell this because it can give the wrong impression or can require more of a follow-up, but I'm a mega fan of the band Kiss.
Oh yes.
And and there's something about them that have, they just live here rent free the whole time. It's the aesthetics, and it's the stage show, and it's thinking that music can be something more than just what you play. And I'll be the first to say, I don't think there's a good Kiss album, and they had about 35. So it's not, that's something that's kind of bigger than music. And I think I enjoy seeing that with bands, and seeing what can they do that's more. As much as I love listening to Radiohead as well. Radiohead's a favorite band of my wife, and that's on, and I love listening to more intelligent music. But sometimes just thinking that music is there as an escape is something that I just love going to, like, and something that synth pop and synthwave really help with. I think it's kind of this, I like to say it's this nostalgia. It's rose tinted glasses for a time that never existed, but we can all kind of pretend we all have the same imaginary version of the 80s that just didn't exist, and we can all just like open these different chapters on new stories that happen there, but they're all in this same shared universe somehow that we all know the rules to. So it's just seeing what can music be more than just putting on the CD.
Yeah, I like that. Going back to what you said right at the beginning there about Vice City, I very much did the same. I don't know about you, but what I would used to do is I'd find a plane, and I think in Vice City you could fly.
Helicopters were in Vice City.
Yeah, that was
they did have helicopters in there.
And I would find a chopper, and then I would just circle and listen to the same radio station, and waiting for, I think it was Cutting Crew, Dying My Arms Tonight. I'm fairly certain that was on there, and I would wait.
What a song.
Yeah, fantastic song. I love it. And I would wait for that to come on, and then just keep circling around. Yeah, that Vice City game is fantastic, and Kiss as well. Kiss are fantastic. I mean, songwriters, as you mentioned there about a band who are bigger than them. That's probably the wrong phrase. Not necessarily bigger than their music, but they certainly, as a brand, as an entity, they did it the right way. I mean, if you look at what they were doing in the 70s into the 80s as well. I mean, Gene Simmons, when you got the figures, and I think they had a cartoon as well, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, well, they had a Marvel comic actually that they put their own. They put vials of their own blood into the red ink that got mixed into the comic. It was all about this bigger thing. So, I kind of feel like I keep that mentality, obviously on this tiny scale, but everything I do, like, well, how can we make this bigger or more bombastic, or how how do we make this more of a talking point than just this one thing we're doing? If we're already going to do something, we may as well turn it into something a little bit bigger and a little bit more exciting. That's something that we try and do.
And
without...
make it different, do something different. I
Yeah.
didn't know they did that. That's so narcissistic. They're doing that.
Isn't it? They were playing the media with it. Gene Simmons obviously has his character within the band, and I will never be certainly not of those days like a Gene Simmons defender. But Paul Stanley, the lead singer, is my go-to, and they all have these characters. And Paul Stanley's this romantic figure with roses, and he's the lover of the group, and then Gene Simmons is the opposite side of that with demons spitting blood. But they had this reputation for being devil worshippers, and Kiss standing for Knights in Satan's service and everything. And it was never true. They're so soft. Yeah. They're so light. I actually saw them on Download last week, which was their last ever UK show. And throughout the day, the crowd, when people were announcing that Kiss were headlining that night, the crowd are booing because that's a crowd of metalheads and rockers, and they don't like Kiss because Kiss is not that. It's this kind of separate thing. It fits best in there, better Download than it leads already, but also it's so different and divisive.
Yeah, I think I saw Kiss. This will take me back now. I wish I'd gone to Download this year. But I saw them in 2000, I think it was 2008 or 2009 at Download. And
I was there in 2008 as well.
Yeah. Oh, probably. No, I stood right at the back of them. I sort of I was going from A to B and they were playing at the same time.
Yeah.
I can't remember. I don't know if it was the full lineup or not. Don't know.
Well, yeah, they've Gene and Paul. I think that as long as they're there at the head, then I think it all makes sense. They're talking and they're talking about replacing them at some point down the line. But I think that will be a very short-lived experiment. That as soon as they go, it's done. I think.
100%. I think that's where they're seeing it as maybe as a brand rather than like a rock group.
They want to keep the Hello Kitty merchandise going. But,
yeah, exactly. But I like what you said there about how you're trying to, on a smaller scale, trying to emulate it with the live shows that you guys put on as well, which we'll come back onto in a bit later.
Yeah.
So that kind of moves us on nicely then onto like the birth of Pensacola Mist. So first things first, the name. Can you tell us where the name came from?
Yeah. Well, like most names, I guess, or at least half names, out of thin air, really. The Mist part just happened straight away. It was always going to be Mist, and what's interesting is that we had this name when we recorded an album that was primarily guitar focused and was more down that sort of block party route that Oliver and I wrote together in our home studio. But it translated so well into the synth world, we didn't have to consider changing it because Pensacola Mist just fits in here with this feeling. But yeah, so Mist had this evocative 80s mystery, behind it, and we knew that you couldn't just be called Mist. There'll be a million other Mists, and if you Google Mist, you're going to get weather reports, and you want to be able to find us. You got to be able to find us. So we were thinking about place names in America, again thinking about that sort of romanticizing part of the States, and especially if you are not from the States, and specifically I guess from the UK, where everything that we ate in pop culture wise was from America, really. 90% of everything that we saw on TV or listened to was big from the States. So we started thinking of places in the States and just trying to match it with Mist and seeing what worked. And it was, Oliver and I both have been lifelong wrestling fans as well. So we were just listing off wrestlers' hometowns, and then we got to Pensacola and thought, Pensacola, yeah, there's something in that. And it kind of flows nicely. So Pensacola Mist it was, so out of that one night of what the hell do we put with Mist? It kind of came together.
Nice, I like that. That's a great story about being wrestling fans as well. And it's odd you mentioned that, because earlier this week I found I had some time on my hands, and I was a wrestling fan back when I was sort of 13, 14. This was the prime era of Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock and Mankind, and that whole era. And I was watching videos from back then, and I ended up watching a Hulk Hogan. This is going way back even further, versus Undertaker. And it's amazing how wrestling just circles back, and it sort of underpins a lot of the social media, not a lot of it, but some of the social media I do as well. Whenever I'm responding to things, if I can't think of anything, I'll just find a wrestling gif and chuck in there. But it's great to find that somebody else has done something similar and is on a similar pathway with that. But no, that's cool. That's a cool Cool way to come up with the name.
Yeah, there's so many lessons though that come from wrestling, much like you think of with Kiss and the aesthetics of it all, and and almost what they call gimmicks. Their characters are gimmicks, and in music, I think that the legends that you put up there kind of have these gimmicks. Like they're not these people that are living this. It's definitely themselves. And in wrestling, like I think in music, best gimmicks are when it's a person just turned up to 10 or 11. You know, if we want to just talk Spinal Tap.
Yeah.
So, and I feel like that's something that we've kind of tried to do as well with, you know, whenever I play on the stage, I've got these fingerless gloves. I always wear a different leather jacket, and the show that we've got coming up next week, we're all in these black sequins, and it's like we're not going to wear that stuff out and about, but it also doesn't feel uncomfortable when we do it on the stage because we're just finding these characters, these gimmicks that kind of the same as the characters that Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley were playing, or that Undertaker is in wrestling, or Stone Cold Steve Austin. They're taking elements of themselves and just turning it up, and I think that any classical, you know, Freddie Mercury and David Bowie and Michael Jackson and all those people are kind of a gimmick that they are living and turning up 10 and kind of presenting themselves, and then that's, you know, like that's how you can make a good connection with audiences by being more than a shoegazer, which, you know, it is all fine if that's what you do, but I think it's more fun to kind of find that character and turn it into something.
No, I'm with you on that one. I totally agree. And I think when you see live acts, and you can see that they've put the effort in to make something different, something visual, to go with their music as well. I think it's a massive part of the overall show. And also it comes back to the fact that there is something memorable as well. And it's a different experience that they would get otherwise. And it's more fun for you, I think, as the performer as well. I remember when I was in a band and I performed, and admittedly, we didn't go down the stretch of having the outfits and stuff like that. But I would always think to myself, you kind of want to, I was never a shoegazer, which is probably why I made so many mistakes when I was performing live.
Right, yeah. Me too.
But I thought to myself, you know what, there's another guitarist in the band, so I can sort of get away with it a bit. And it was heavy metal, so once again, there's some leniency there. But yeah, I think certainly you got to put on a show. And I think that's key. And from what I've read from the feedback and I've seen, and the various bits and pieces I've seen online, you as a live outfit certainly do put on a show.
No, we try.
Yeah, which is amazing. So with regards to the band itself, so how did you sort of meet? I, from what I can gather, is it was yourself and Oliver to begin with, and then Melissa joined further down the line. How did you meet Oliver, and how did things get started?
So Oliver and I, I'm a couple of years older than Oliver, but we both met in school together, and you know, we both hang out in the music room, and we were in different bands, but we got to know each other that way. And you start jamming as you do when you've got some free time at school or at breaks, and we just kind of always there are a couple of people that I've been lucky enough to meet and can just partner with in terms of music, and just I do something and they do something that completes it, and it's always that way. And so Oliver and I have been making music together for although Pensacola Mist is probably about five years old now, we've been writing music together for about 15 years, I think, going way back to school, in different bands and in different forms. But this Pensacola Mist was the first time that we tried to really come up with something that felt cohesive, and that we kind of had an idea in mind from the start. We're from a really small town called Berwick-upon-Tweed that's right on the border of England and Scotland, and we're 60 miles away from Newcastle and 60 miles away from Edinburgh. So we're quite out the way, and being quite rural, there's not a huge population here. So you find yourself, there's the same 20, 30 musicians of your age group that just circulate between bands. And of course, it's always the case that there's probably 3 drummers in town, and you're all trying to get a hold of them. And when you can get a hold of them, you tend to have 4 vastly different styles of musicians that come together when you're in that sort of situation. And so what we've made in the past has been really fun, but has not been, I guess cohesive is the best word for it. We're all coming with these different influences, and you get something interesting, but sometimes you kind of want to create a piece that feels like it belongs all together, and that it's really kind of trying to say something without getting distracted by how 4 different genres might approach it, I think. And so Oliver and I started Pensacola Mist primarily as a home studio project, where we would write together. We would write songs that we believed in, and then we'd maybe try and find the band to fill the gaps after that point, which we knew would be tricky, but at least we'd have some material to kind of start the ball rolling. Is someone interested in filling the shoes of this drum track that we've already written, or this second guitar part or something? And I guess that's how Pensacola Mist started in form that it is now.
I think that's a really cool way of doing it. I think because with regards to certain instruments in a band, you probably know this, they're a lot harder to find than others. Drummers, for example, finding a good drummer can be very, very tricky, and bass players as well. And so actually not having that hindrance of thinking, oh, we can't actually do anything until we find these two other or three or however it may be other individuals is actually quite nice to hear that you can just start writing and creating this body of work and thinking, actually, now we can plug the gaps with the people we find along the way. So I think that's a fantastic way of doing it. So how long did you sort of write music with Oliver before Melissa came onto this?
Yeah, so we did a couple of guitar-based albums, just the two of us, and we were still at that point essentially preparing material to play live with the band. And eventually, I mean, the technology is at the core of everything that we've done with Pensacola Mist up to this day. We've never, we couldn't do it without the technology that we use now. And I think so many other synthwave and synth-pop artists would say the same with how heavily they rely on what they can do with technology that's in front of them. So it was having GarageBand on my Mac that let us do those first two albums. And it was free and it was on there and it's really easy to use. And that helped us kind of create that first vision. Then when we got to try and find the musicians to fill the gap, it just didn't really happen. I guess we're in that rural area again. We couldn't find somebody that kind of felt that same material. We tried a couple of drummers who came along and they kind of liked the idea, but I absolutely understand this, but coming into a project that's somewhat established in terms of the material there, which was helpful for us to know who we wanted to be, meant that they felt like there was a lack of ownership on their part, and I completely get that, and they kind of want to be involved in the origin of the material as well. So that made sense to me. So we had just about given up on ever playing live and thought, maybe this is fine. This is the future. We can make this music, and we maybe can't play it live, but we can keep writing and recording and sending it out there and try and get it across in other ways without being in front of a live audience. And it was then that we discovered that Churches, who are a band that we were both fans of, but didn't, we weren't mega fans, but we had been fans throughout the years. That was when we discovered that they played for 10 years without a live drummer. And, they were using samples and they were using drum machines. And we thought, maybe that's something that we can do. So that single-handedly twisted the genre of music that we write, because us playing guitar with a drum and backing track, we were concerned would feel quite karaoke, and we never wanted to kind of be like a fake band. We thought, well, how do we turn this into actually what we do then? And then this is now a part of us. It's not a limitation. It's what makes us is playing with this technology. So that's when we just started to dip our toes more and more into synth and bringing out arpeggiators and trying to build up the tracks. And then all of a sudden the guitars were staying hanging up here. That's by the by. We're just sitting and writing stuff with keys instead. And so we did two albums. We did one album, this Neon City, that was our first kind of synth-based album, and we just loved working with that material. It unlocked so much more in us. I'm not sure, as a musician yourself, whether you've ever felt the same way you pick up the guitar or you pick up your instrument and you just find yourself kind of using the same riffs, using the same chord patterns. And what this let us do was kind of like start again, but with some of the songwriting knowledge that we'd kind of developed over the years, but this entirely new way of thinking with looking at keys and everything. So it was really refreshing to us to do that and let us have the live show. So this is a really long way of going around telling you that,
go ahead,
that when we had Want to Believe, the album we released last year, we were looking for a female vocalist. In fact, we kind of always had our eye on a female vocalist, and again, similarly, we just didn't find one that would really work or that would mesh with our style very well. And Melissa had actually worked on a project that Oliver was doing, where he was uploading covers to YouTube every week, and he would get guest vocalists from. We've both been involved in theatre as well, and Oliver more so than myself. he's been in fringe productions and musicals, and he has lots of contacts who can sing. So he was working with all these different musicians and different singers. And Melissa was one that stuck in my mind, certainly. It's just having this really beautiful, sweet, soft voice, but it wasn't apologetic, which was quite difficult to find, I think, because sometimes you can be quite sickly sweet. I feel like she's this I kind of call her bittersweet sometimes, because she's got that really sweet, soft vocals, but there is a bite in it, and you don't want to get on the wrong side of it, and you don't want to unlock it when you want it to be there when she kind of unleashes. So it just worked out so well. We asked her to do the song "Sex and Violence" on that album, and I guess the rest is history. It just worked so well that we thought, let's try this out. So we tried out doing some gigs with her for a year, building her into the material we already had and kind of writing things in the studio. And then we thought, this is it. This is just the way it was meant to be. So I think last November, December, we announced that she was going to join full time. And it feels like we're complete now.
Yeah, that's a fantastic answer, and there's a few bits I took away from what you mentioned there. So circling back,
sorry, once you wind me up, it's hard to stop.
No. There's loads of good stuff in there. So circling back to what you said about playing the same riffs, and I very much did the same. I remember being in a band, and maybe it's because of my own limitations as a guitarist, and maybe I could have put more time into it, the whole 10,000 hours, as it were. Yeah. But I was finding myself, I'd always jam out the same riff, and I'd be playing the same sort of lead bit, and it would always be like, oh man, I've heard this bit before, and I was stagnant. I couldn't come up with anything new. Admittedly, I probably wasn't the main songwriter in the band I was in, which is total polar opposite to what I do now, where I am the songwriter and what I release. Yeah. But I very much agree with what you said there. And it wasn't until I started writing the electronic music and started using keys. I'm not a piano player. I'm not a keyboard player either.
Same.
But programming is my friend in this instance. Mm-hmm. But when it came to the sonic soundscape available to me with the different instruments, and also the variety of different things I could find online, it sort of opened up this whole new world, as you mentioned then, about where you find it when you in the band itself. So certainly been down that route, and it's probably the same for a number of producers and artists. I would say, kind of, it just opens up this world of possibilities when you're. It's amazing, really, if you think about it. And I think this touches on something I had an interview last week, and we were talking about the accessibility of technology, and the accessibility means that you could have a 13-inch MacBook Pro. Or there are other devices available if you,
of course.
Just in case somebody does want sponsorship further down the line. I mean, you could have that, and you could write. I mean, the amount of stuff that I hear that has been produced on just that alone is incredible. So there's that, and then it was the edge on the vocals as well, which I totally agree with. And I don't know what you think, but I think Churches as an influence. I know I released a song a couple of years ago, and there was very much a Churches influence on that. And there's kind of an edge or a bite. I mean, that might be slightly to do with the accent, but there's certainly an edge to that. And I think you're right in that sense, and I think that's what you need. And in particular, that song that you mentioned, "Sex and Violence," which is amazing, by the way. And how I haven't been streaming that on repeat before, I don't know, but I've been listening to that all week, and it's such a good song. So. The audience listening, if you want a first sort of dive into Pensacola Mist, go check out that tune. And obviously, check out everything else as well. But I mean, that is a fantastic
good
song,
recommendation. Man. Thank you.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. And it's like you said there about the grittiness behind the vocal. If you didn't have it, if Melissa didn't have it, I don't think you would have that edginess that comes with the chorus as well. If it was a soft vocal with that line and that particular hook, it wouldn't work, would it?
Yeah. You're right.
Yeah. Amazing stuff. So let's take a quick break from this episode so that I can tell you about a free resource that I made for you. It's a PDF checklist that describes what you need to do to properly prepare a mix for mastering. So you've done the hard work and you love your mix, yet suitably preparing a mix for mastering is often overlooked by musicians, resulting in delayed sessions, excessive back and forth conversation, and frustration on both parts. I want to help fix that. So if you want this free resource, just go to www.synthmusicmastering.com, as this checklist will help and guide you to make the mastering process as smooth, transparent, and exciting as possible. So again, the URL is www.synthmusicmastering.com for this free preparing a mix for mastering checklist. Let's get back to the episode. Kind of circling back right to the beginning. You mentioned how you yourself and Oliver started this project and you weren't quite sure whether it was going to go live, depending on who came in. What was the initial goal, and has that changed over time?
I guess it's twisting along the whole way. we had aspirations to be regionally famous. I think that was what we started with the guitar band, is we want to, the Northeast has got a really great music scene. It's quite guitar heavy. But I think that when we started, we thought there's no reason why we can't get involved in some of those conversations too. And that was our lot. That's what we would be happy with. We'd have just done some of the circuit there, made friends with the people that we were hearing on that scene. But then once we opened up and changed into this synth vibe, we've kind of, this is actually something that I've also stolen from Kiss, but it's something that we work with too, is to try and be the band that we haven't seen or that we want to see live. And there are certainly many bands that do everything that we do on a bigger scale and with I guess more bells and whistles, but on the scale of the shows that we do in sort of small mid-sized venues, like I still haven't seen someone that brings in the fully programmed light show that we do and have the larger than life soundscape that's created through that. And I mean, that sounds cocky, and I certainly don't mean it to be, but I think primarily it comes to coming to a Pensacola Mist show. It's in the downstairs of this pub, for instance, or it's in this small venue we saw Blues in last week, and then you've got this big light show that just like I didn't expect to see something like this in this place. That's something that we kind of love playing with, and we using some of the staging experience that we've had and the memories of shows that we've been to. What are the moments that you remember when you leave a show, and why do you remember that? And most times for me, it's because there was a real there was a real, I don't want to say rehearsed element to it, but there's a blocking moment of saying, in this point in this song, this thing will happen, and it may just be that. So when I saw The Midnight a few weeks ago, the saxophonist goes to his spotlight in the stage and he plays, and you remember, and I can see that now and I remember it, and that's that's not saying that it's disingenuous, but it's like he had Mark there to stand at that point and the crowd go crazy, and if he was stood at the back in the back line doing the same thing, it would have still been impressive, but it wouldn't have left that mark. And so, that's the sort of level of things that we want to try and do, is we want you to have half a dozen things that you remember when you leave seeing us as these kind of memory markers. I think that's it. I think that we'd be happy with that. It's so great to get it out to new people and to kind of widen the net. And I love seeing the countries that have streamed us. And even if we've only had one stream in a country, to just add another country to the list and say, we've been streamed in over 100 countries. It's great. I want one of those scratch maps and just see even one stream in every country would be such a lovely thing to have, just to say we've been heard all around the world. It's kind of small, manageable things, but I guess ultimately we just want to keep having fun with what we do and keep pushing ourselves and until, well, I don't know, I guess until we feel we've done it all. And I don't think that's ever going to happen.
No, it's a nice response. I like that. And it kind of what you've basically done there is you've answered what was going to be my next question, which is amazing, which was about the live show, what the audience can expect. And I think you've articulated it very, very well there in what you've said. And just touching on what you said there about The Midnight, mildly jealous that you've seen it, by the way, because I haven't. I did see you being there on social media. It's amazing when you go to gigs like that. And I've had this, not a midnight gig, but I've been to other shows. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when you are feeling as an artist, maybe you hit a bit of a rut, you're not sure where it's going, and then you go watch a live act like The Midnight or someone like that, and it just really reignites that flame to think, you know what, I'm going to go away from here. And it's moments like you said about the saxophonist stood on the stage there. And I've experienced something like that. So I'm a huge Def Leppard fan, and I remember watching Def Leppard. It was on my birthday for a number of years ago at the Motorpoint in Cardiff. And then it was the Hysteria tour. So Phil Collins walks out, and he walks straight out to the middle, like low lights. And then suddenly there's a beam of light on him. It's just him playing the intro. And I'm just like, wow, this, even now, I get shivers when I talk about it. And I'm just like, man.
But how strong is that memory, and how clear is that in your mind?
Exactly. I mean, I can remember bits and pieces from the rest of the gig, but I couldn't tell you what song was being played at the time. But there's that one moment, and you're thinking, you know what? It's moments like that sort of like inspire you to continue on as a musician. But also, you can take that away. I'm not a performing artist anymore, but it's certainly something, and you can put all those pieces together and create this sort of
I think so.
Frankenstein hybrid show, which is
Yeah,
amazing.
making set lists is always fun, and in fact, this album we thought more about the live show than any others, as we've kind of established ourselves with what that live show means to us and what we want it to mean to the audiences. So there's definitely parts in these tracks that have how that will come across to the audience there. Sometimes it's easy to get stuck in what I like in the moment of being sat in the chair here on the screen, but it's been really helpful to kind of think a bit bigger and actually envisage what that looks like on the stage. And it may be just like we have a song where we just leave, Melissa and I leave, and we just usually I use Ableton to trigger all of the samples and all of the effects, and I'm doing that with all the different parts, so I can kind of remix it. I can drop the drums out, I can drop the bass out, I can add it, and I can repeat bits. So they're all separate tiles in Ableton. But for that song, I just hit play and I've programmed that to just run, and Oliver just takes the stage, and he's there on his own, and he does this amazing performance of this track. His vocals are so strong on it. We don't need anything else. We leave, and people always, they remember that bit too. We left, and then we get to come back, and it just keeps the set fresh. Because even seeing bands that I've really enjoyed, by the 50th minute or the 15th song, and I'm kind of feeling like it's a little samey sometimes, and to kind of break it up, something that certainly I enjoy seeing.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And it's something that's echoed in music as well. And I had a conversation with another artist a number of weeks ago, or a week or so ago, and it was when I sent a track across to the this producer. I was just like, "Can you just give me a bit of feedback?" And they said the exact same thing. It's like you have a song, it's much like a live performance as well, where you have that night and day, and sometimes you need to reduce those dynamics of what's going on just to keep the interest there. Because if it's full throttle all the way through, you kind of, like you mentioned there, I've been to gigs where I'm like that, and at the end of it, I'm like, it's just a blur. You know?
Yeah.
And having that night and day, and specifically when it's just one person, something different, keeps the audience engaged. I think it's a fantastic thing to do. Do you ever
it's fun.
perform down in? How far into South? For the audience listening, I'm based in the Southwest. How far south into the Southwest have you been?
So we we started our live show about less than a year before the pandemic hit. So that was good timing.
Yep.
And so we just started to kind of know who we are and get our show together when we had to stop. And so we've only done, we've done about 20 gigs, but they've mostly been regionally here in the Northeast. We have plans to do a tour later in the year, and we want to kind of cover a lot of, most of the major cities. So hopefully we'll get that towards the end of the year, which will be really fun to get in front of new audiences. Again, going back to technology and the sort of reach of social media and how brilliant the scene seems to be with synth, is that everyone seems to be so supportive. And when you have these synth groups on Facebook pages or Instagram pages, and they start sharing about these gigs coming up, and there's just this instant swell of support. I feel quite lucky to be involved in it, even if very few people have heard of us. There'd be enough to say, oh, there's this thing and they've got this show and we'll go and see it. And once that starts on those pages, I reckon that we could get a nice sized crowd. I mean, a nice sized crowd to me is if we can get 20 people in a city we've never been in. I'm happy with that. That's the start of something. But it feels like it's a really supportive scene, and I'm hoping that will take us around the country a little further than just here in the Northeast.
No, that would be amazing. The reason why I asked this is because I wanted to make sure that I hadn't missed out that you're performing down this way.
Not yet. Not yet. We'll be down to see you soon.
I think the closest, I know there was a recent event in Bristol. So I'm in Exeter. Bristol's not that far, and there was a gig put on there. But to echo what you said there about the support, I think if you were to say if a gig is put on whereby it is synth orientated, synth wave, synth pop, synth music, I think because the scene and the network and the shareability and the way content is shared by people in the scene and the fans of it as well and the artists, it's different to what I've experienced before. And I think you'd get a crowd. Specifically now, people are hungry to go out and enjoy live music as well. Yeah. So you put those two factors together. I think,
there's friends around the country as well, and label mates that we know that we are keen to tie up with as well. That we've not met in person yet, but we would love to do shows together. Young Empress in particular, we've been talking to quite a lot about doing some shows together, and I think that should work really well when that happens. And it's all a case of when and not if. And you're right. There's just these real solid, genuine sort of support and friendships in the scene. There's very little bickering and negativity compared to some of the other stuff that could be out there. And I think it's because it's quite niche and but it's quite rare still for everybody to know that it grows when everyone's in it together.
Yeah, I agree. I think I say this on a lot of the podcast episodes in terms of how supportive the community is and how you meet and talk to new people every week. And specifically doing things like this podcast as well. I talk to so many different people, not only on the podcast, but outside of it as well in relation to it. And it is amazing. Compared to what I've experienced in other musical genres, which is totally fantastic. But no, I look forward to seeing that, and obviously I'll keep an eye on the page and whatnot, and on Instagram and stuff, and see where you guys are performing. Because I know I've been to countless rock and metal gigs, but admittedly, I've never actually been to have I? No, I can't say I have ever actually been to a synth wave, synth pop, synth music based gig. It's always been rock and metal for me, so it'd be something different, something interesting, I'm sure.
There's a rumbling though in the scene. I think that Bristol event I didn't get to, but I was very envious not to be there, and I kept my eye on it and saw everything that was on socials with it, and I'm hoping that becomes a somewhat regular event. That might become the UK Super Bowl or the WrestleMania of synth. Is this Bristol event, and that would be brilliant. But it's just. Yeah, there's a rumbling, and again, until the midnight, I hadn't really seen anything that was super synth. Again, our location hasn't really helped. The pandemic hasn't really helped, but it just feels as if the time is right. In the next few years, there'll probably be plenty of opportunity to see more.
I definitely think so, and I think also from a production side of things, when I listen to I do admittedly listen to Radio 1. I dive in and out because I like to keep on top of the current musical trends. And the more I listen to it, I can hear elements creeping in, these little synth elements and these little arpeggiators and synth pads.
It's a brilliant song, but Harry Styles, I forget what that track is. This is where I don't usually check into Radio 1, and I should know, but there's that Harry Styles song that's kind of taken over the last few months. And we've had a number of people say, that sounds like a Pensacola Mist song. There's just that little way of thinking, that sort of 80s, the riff. As It Was, is that what it's called?
Yes.
The Harry Styles track. And it's a brilliant song. I wish it was ours, but you can hear it. There's easy made synth covers in some of these pop hits these days now. So yeah,
it's interesting you mentioned that one because I follow Justin Hawkins from The Dark on YouTube, and he's got a fantastic. I never knew this existed. I think it's Justin Hawkins Rides Again. And I strongly recommend, even if you're not a Darkness fan, just go check it out, audience, because he kind of picks apart music and performances and things like that. And he did one on David Coverdale, Whitesnake, massive Whitesnake fan, man. And but he did one on that song by Harry Styles, and he pointed out how it's the actual phrasing used in that song is the same as Aha, Take On Me. But it's shifted, so they start at a different note. I know there's more to it than this, but he's described it way better than I can. And I think in the Harry Styles one, they start one or two notes ahead of Aha. But I think that just goes to show that how successful that song is. And then it's essentially, if you look back into the 80s, it's sort of like it's been influenced by one of the biggest songs of the 80s in Take On Me by Aha. And it just goes to show how much that synth and that 80s nostalgia.
I did notice that riff. I was driving in the comments and went, wait a second. And I'm not one of these that says that every band should sue every other band for because there are only so many notes and there are only so many orders. So that's all fair game. That's legally distinct enough. But I did notice it too, thinking you can just transpose this a little bit and it kind of starts to work. But it doesn't take it away.
No, not at all. It's like you say, you got to find influence somewhere. I mean, find me someone who's just writing out of the blue. Who's says they have no influences, and I'd call them a liar. That might be a bold statement by me there. I'll probably get a lot of people saying I'm wrong, but I don't know.
I'd like to say actually as well that I'm very envious of what I would call proper songwriters who do take it very seriously and create this amazing art, because there is a real art to songwriting, obviously, but there are these different sides, and synth and the sort of synth that we do is trying to just kind of focus on fun and more than trying to be transformative, trying to transform someone's life with the lyrics of a particular song. I find that quite freeing because I'm not very good at lyrics. I think typically we have a good go, and in fact, actually, that's part of the reason why we mostly create stories for our tracks rather than try and find something from within us. We kind of create a scenario, and we create a scene, and then we think, well, what does that character feel? And that kind of helps us kind of write through them rather than kind of something deep and meaningful within us. So I just want to say, in case there are any real serious songwriters listening, I'm absolutely envious of what you can do, and I wish I could, but that's that's not really what Pensacola Mist is about.
Well, I mean, in response to that, in all fairness, I think you're fantastic songwriters. So,
Thank you.
yeah, you do yourself a bit of a disservice. But no, I think...
Well, I worried there. I thought, did I just slag off Pensacola Mist too much? I certainly didn't mean to. But
No,
I can't get the balance right here.
No, that's fine. So it kind of leads on nicely to my next question, because I'm well aware of time here. And this is what happens on this show. I often digress, and I then look at the clock, and I'm like, oh, actually, I haven't even got to the third part of the show yet. So, which is the songwriting and the compositional process behind the band. How does that start? So obviously you've got Melissa on board now. So
yeah,
who? Maybe that's the wrong sort of question. I was going to say who's the main songwriter, but let's put it another way. How does a song come together?
Yeah. So until this album, every song started with Oliver and I sat next to each other at this desk and a blank Logic document open, and we would pretty much always go straight to the basses and just figure out a bass line that we liked, and then kind of built from there and kind of seen where it took us. The pandemic changed things again, that we had to work separately for the first time, and a lot of the tracks on this next album have been originated separately and then finished together. But there's no real this is the way it's done these days anymore. Sometimes ideas just hit, and I'm sure you'll hear this from most people, but it could be you just wake up in the morning and I'm humming a song that doesn't exist, or that I hope doesn't exist, and then I come upstairs and try and turn that into something as a 10-minute sketch, and then we come back to it later, or it's an idea. It's the lyrics to something that kind of like just hit, like, that's great, and I don't think I know a song that sings about that one thing. So maybe that's the start of something, and we kind of take it. But I think my favorite way is the blank project with Oliver and I sat next to each other. And as frustrating as that can be sometimes, to be on to a loser, or to struggle to kind of build it into what we expect it could be, when it does work, it's just worth it. That high of going, okay, this is great, and the song starts to spiral and just unfold itself and kind of write itself. Sometimes it feels like when we get onto the right track.
Nice, I like that. It's quite refreshing as well to hear that you're together songwriting, because in the electronic world that we live in particular, when it comes to music production, I mentioned this earlier about the accessibility of music, and it's fantastic that you can collaborate with someone on the other side of the world and you can create something incredible. But it's also quite nice to hear that you're sat next to Oliver and writing at the same time.
Couch co-op all the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Melissa, where does Melissa fall into this? Is she local to you guys, or is this where you?
So Melissa's in Edinburgh. So
Okay.
we get fewer days in the studio with her. Again, the timing of her joining has been quite tricky. I'd like to see us go back to more 3-way blank projects in this room. There's only one track actually on this next album that started in that way, and it's really it's really refreshing. It feels really different because we had those 3 opinions kind of going into it. And that's a track called "Afraid to Stay the Night," which was one of the first days we spent with Melissa after thinking, is this a permanent thing? What would it be like if we wrote a song that included Melissa from the off, rather than trying to put her into something afterward? And yeah, so that's what we'd really like to do. Melissa is actually very good at lyrics, so she's been really useful to us, because Oliver and I have spent so many hours in absolute silence where we just can't find the 4 words that we need to fill that pre-chorus before we get in there, that doesn't sound really cheesy or really lame, but also sounds as though we thought about it a little bit. And so sometimes, well, more than once, and I don't know quite how Melissa feels about this, but we'll just leave that blank and we'll see what Melissa can come up with. And usually all the time it's gold, and we just keep it and it's unchanged from that point. So that's a real key that she's bringing into our songwriting there. But she doesn't have a musical background in that she knows how to play any instruments, but she has listened to music throughout her whole life. She's a big fan. She's a big fan of music and always has been. Again, she's been in musicals. She's a fantastic singer. So it'll be so great to see what that can bring to the studio when we're in the space going ahead. So yeah, we've just begun that songwriting process with Melissa, really, but I'm excited to see what it means when we manage to block a weekend in the studio together and see what we can make.
No, it does sound very exciting. So my next question off the back of that is, you mentioned there about earlier when you have a blank project, a blank slate, blank canvas as it were, and then you throw some ideas down. So this is probably the $1 million question. How do you know? Because I don't know about you, but I start projects and then I'll put them to the side and I'll start something else and I'll do that and I'll revisit. How do you know when you're onto a winner? How do you know when you're like, actually, this song's got legs?
I think every album that we've done, we have about between 60 and 100 tracks that we've started for that album, and so most of them end up being something that we don't pursue further. And sometimes we try and it feels like we're trying too hard. And if it ever feels like we're trying too hard, then it probably wasn't meant to be. And there's some nice phrases in some of those tracks. And occasionally I go back to see if there's anything that we can pull out and use somewhere else, or to see if all of a sudden inspiration will hit with fresh eyes on it a year later. But it tends to be if we sit and we're thinking for too long, or we've not been excited about it for a little while, then it's just, we'll just leave it and we'll just start again. And so some sessions we might start 6 songs and we get 10, 15, 20 minutes, half an hour in, 40 minutes, and go, we're just not feeling it, and move on, try another one. It feels like quite a natural decision to make, to drop a track and find another one. I think it feels that way, that we're always trying to find a track that will unveil itself rather than try to create a track, which is silly because it probably is the same thing, I guess. But sometimes you've got the wrong ingredients to start with.
Yeah, I like that idea, and I think it's a great way of thinking in terms of, rather than, well, in what you said there, and I think it echoes an interview I did. I think it was last year. Who was it with? I can't remember who it was with now, but the artist mentioned how they just write songs and songs and songs and songs, and eventually there will be that one song that sort of stands above the rest, rather than trying to write the perfect song. I think it's very similar in a way, I guess, to actually, I know when I'm writing, I don't know, copy for a website, or I'm writing a bio or something, or just anything, I'll just write and then I'll go back and refresh and then revisit it and see what it's like and rehash it. So it's very, I'm with you on that one. Rather than trying to think, all right, I'm going to write the next masterpiece, just kind of see what happened. So
it's always got to be fun. Yeah, I think.
Well,
I think that's
exactly
what it starts with, is if we're not having fun, and that's why we did this. This was our little escape. We had other than trying to maybe do some shows, at the very start, it was just, we had some free time and it was always fun. So let's keep it fun. So as long as it's fun, it kind of like works itself out.
Yeah, totally on board with that. And I think as soon as it doesn't become fun, it turns into a part-time job, which I've been down that route. And then, that's when it can get a bit laborious. But no, it sounds like whatever you're doing is working which is great. So, and once again, I'm aware of time. So there's a few songs I wanted to talk about, but I'm going to have to sort of like shorten my list down, as it were. So Horizon, correct me if I'm wrong, that's your latest single?
It is, yeah.
Can you tell the audience listening, if they haven't heard it before, sort of the story behind Horizon? What can they expect?
Yeah, well, Horizon was, I guess, an Oliver, primarily an Oliver idea that he brought to the table that we kind of finished. But again, thinking of the live show, we try and keep the energy up on a lot of tracks, but we are aware, as you said before, sometimes that can feel that can be overwhelming and border on annoying if you've just got lots of noise and lots of energy all the time. So Horizon is quite I think of it as more of a chill out track. It's, but it has quite a fast tempo to it. It keeps driving through, but we're trying to create some space within the track. It's the story of a bank robbery gone wrong, essentially. This is again where synth worked really well for us, and sort of that nostalgia for the 80s, that we can mine all these ridiculous and great 80s movies and plots and think, does it sound like it could have been an 80s movie? Great, that's okay. It's not. It might be over the top for folk or for indie or something similar, but we can write a song about a bank robbery. That's okay. It's not unusual here. It's a safe space. It works out well. I guess we tried to make an earworm that's our choruses tend to have a few elements to them, and I think this one we tried to just scale it back, and so essentially the chorus pretty much the phrase "play it cool" over and over. It's the person trying to tell themselves in this situation that they're failing at to keep cool, stay calm, to play it cool, and so yeah, that's kind of like the little hook, the little earworm that we wanted to kind of create with that one. Of course, mixing it and getting it ready for release, I got slightly sick of hearing "Play It Cool" because it's in that track 64 times, and you'll know how many times you listen to a track. So I must have heard "Play It Cool," over 10,000 times by this point. but yeah, that's the story of Horizon. It's it's this kind of upbeat, chill track that's I guess got this sort of radio friendly feel, I guess, because of that repetitive hook in it in the chorus.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that I think listening to your catalogue of music, you're very good as an outfit at writing hook, and it's something that I find that sticks in my head a lot. Listening to your music, you mentioned there about the earworms in particular, and a lot. I think when it comes to the sort of music that you're releasing, it's quite similar to the stuff that I've done as well. And I've said this before on the podcast in terms of like I'll play the music to someone else, for example, my girlfriend, and if I find her humming the hook. Mm-hmm. I mean, that I set that sometimes as a barometer of success in terms of like, okay, if I can get someone who's totally new and hasn't heard it before. Because like you said there, I mean, if you're mixing a track or producing it, you listen to the same thing over and over again, regardless of whether it's any good or not. It gets stuck in your head. But no, I think, like I said there, you guys are fantastic at writing hooks.
Thank you.
And I've got to say, and which kind of leads me on nicely to the next question, which is, I mentioned this song earlier about the song called Sex and Violence, which is probably my favorite track that I've heard so far. So you mentioned that was the first song, if I'm right, with Melissa on vocals. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So just a bit of a story behind that one there.
So I guess this was when we were trying to play with heavy synths, because we'd use synth lightly and in sort of synth pop ways, and it's not a pure synthwave track by any means, but we did try to like make it a little darker and kind of bring out some of the sort of dark synth elements of it, and write a melody with Melissa in mind. That was the very first time. So I've got a great demo track of Oliver singing that in what he expects Melissa's voice to sound like, and I'd like to put that out there some point because it's quite funny. But but it was about creating the drama and creating the big bombastic feel of that one, and that was the first time I used a trick that I've used a couple of times since, that I noticed first in I think it was Night Call by Kavinsky, where he's punctuating each of those start notes with a really deep like Steinway or like a big piano sound, like boom, and like just letting that rumble through, and let how powerful that feels to kind of drive that track on, and how the dynamic just increased so much if you've got that low, big, heavy, punchy sound that kind of underpins it. Then you've kind of free, you've got some ground in there to just build up and kind of give it some height as well. So that was a really fun track to work on, bringing in the arps, and Oliver and I, the way that we work so well together, I think, is that Oliver, when he comes up with his tracks, might put in lots and lots and lots of ideas, and they can maybe feel like they need a little bit of focus, and I can come in and bring a little bit of focus in, and that might be, in fact, so in Sex and Violence, there's just a 4-note riff, there's more than 4 notes there, but anyway, it's a really simple part, but it just ties all those other bits into like a central pattern. That's the track that it's going down, and then these other parts are spinning off of it, and that wasn't there before. And what Oliver does to me is that I feel like my tracks sometimes need a level of unpredictability, or they need a little bit more energy. I might get stuck doing a sort of repeating riff that kind of falls in a really nice pattern, a really nice arc, but then I kind of keep it too contained, and Oliver can explode it out. So it works really well together, because he comes to my ideas and makes them bigger, and I kind of come to his ideas and focus them down, and they meet somewhere in the middle. And Sex and Violence, I think, one of my favorite examples of the two of us kind of doing what we do best on that track, and then being a showcase for Melissa's vocals for the first time. That's a real great introduction to, I guess, what we want the next part of Pensacola Mist to be.
No, that's really, really cool. And I like the idea that you mentioned there about augmenting or accentuating the initial hit of the bar with like a Steinway. And you can certainly hear that. And it's that impact that is really, really good on that track. And it's something that I like to do in productions as well, whether that's bringing in an extra sort of kick element during a chorus, or just sort of like automating the volume, or just changing the velocity of a sample slightly just to get that initial punch and impact to come through, and adding dynamics. And I think it's perfectly sort of showcased in that song, which is amazing. And it's so nice as well. I'm envious of your position in your band, that you've got that those two opposite forces coming together in this maelstrom and creating this amazing music, which is, once again, going back to what I said earlier about the accessibility of music and being able to write and produce on your own. And there is that solitary element that actually sometimes it's nice to have someone else there to bounce ideas off of, which, in saying that, the community is great for that, because I know for a fact there's the number of artists I can send a track to and they'll give me really honest and really, really good feedback. So it swings and roundabouts, I guess, in that space.
Can I ask you a question, actually, about
sure.
Based on something that a feeling that I feel, and I'm not aware of it until it happens, and I want to see whether this is something that happens with you too. But I might come up with a track, or Oliver and I come up with a track, and I get really excited about it, and then I'll show it to my wife, or I'll show it to a friend, and at that moment, I realize there's something that I really don't like in it, or that I cringe, and I had never heard it before until I know that someone's listening to it for the first time, and then I kind of cover it up and say, oh, that'll be different. That but I hadn't realized I didn't like it until someone new was listening to it, and it's instant, and there's nothing different except from a different set of ears. And I just wondered whether that's something that you found as well. You were saying about having your girlfriend humming the hook or something, and that being a win. But do you ever have that on the flip side to realize that maybe something's not quite working that you didn't realize?
Yeah, I have, and it's happened when I've released music as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I'm one of those ones whereby I'll have a song and it gets to a point where I'm just like, I've got to call it now. And I know there's a little bits and pieces I'll be able to change, but I've had it where I've been with friends and they've got a playlist going and a song of mine comes on. And I'm like, and I sort of grimace. And they're like, what? Like, you've released it? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm being the diva thing, saying I don't like listening to my own music, but no, I certainly do. Yeah. And then what do I do with it off the back of that? Yeah, it's sometimes
I'll go late
away
in the game then.
Yeah, well, there in that instance. But if it's a demo, for example, I don't know. I think with a demo, it depends. If they point something out to me and say, "Have you considered changing that?" I'll probably go in and do it or have a look at it. But if it's me as an individual, I think when I'm at the point where I'm sending demos out and letting people listen to it, I think I'm almost happy with how it is.
Right.
And I'll leave it as it is. But what I do now is, because otherwise what I find is I binge edit, and I'll go away and listen, and I'm forever. I'll listen to a demo and I'll be like, oh, I need to change that. I need to change that. And I'll just keep going. It's perpetual. So I just knock it on the head. Whereas if someone turns around to me and says, actually, Mark, I mean, you could probably do with a bit more high end there, maybe bring that hat down, or maybe you need to add some high strings here or bring them up in the mix. I'll be like, actually, yeah, you're probably right. So I'll go ahead and do it. So I think for me personally, I'm probably more responsive to other people when they're listening to a demo of mine.
Yeah.
And then I kind of like, with me, just vocals are the one that I toy with for ages with the level. I'm like, it needs to be up there. Oh no, I'll bring it down or up there. So what I do now is, off the back of that, is whenever I bounce out a mix, I'll always do like a 0 dB vocal, and then I'll do a +1 and then a -1.
Right.
And then when it comes to the mastering stage, I'll go in and master, or whoever's mastering it, and I'll send all 3. And then, because when it's mastered, it can then often change it's going to affect the dynamics in the track. So yeah, I don't know. It's a long-winded answer to the question. Yeah, a very long-winded answer to that one there. There was another thing I was going to add to it, but it's totally slipped my mind. That was it. Yeah. So about when someone listens to your song. So I had this conversation with an artist last week, and it was whereby you send your song out, or someone listens to it, and they actually say it's not. They sort of grimace a bit and say, "No, I'm not keen on that track."
Right.
And I've done that, and then I've just shelved that song totally. And sometimes I think you have to go with your gut, and I think it's quite a good song. But someone says to me, "Actually, no, it's not that great." And I think off the back of that interview, I was going to actually, you know what? I'm going to persevere with it, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to release it, or at least put it as a side B. So no, it's tricky when other people listen to your music. Once again, it's a very long-winded answer.
I love it.
Yeah, it depends on the environment.
I think I just build it into my process now of when I feel like I'm making progress with a track, I put that out there to someone, and I don't know if I'm lucky or unlucky, but the people I ask to listen to it don't tend to really give me any sort of constructive feedback on it. They'll just go, typically will just go, oh yeah, that's great, and so I find myself trying to read the room as they're listening to it and try and read their body language through it and put myself in their shoes listening. And I think that's maybe why I kind of try and tune into something that then I find that I don't like. But that whole process, that's a funny stage that I tend to build into most of my tracks. And it might even just be having it on in the office with a colleague at work, or with my wife, or one of my sister-in-laws is over, and I just put that on, and that's when I realize there's something I don't like. But through that with mixing, as I approach the end of an album, I mix it and I export it. I bounce them and I listen to them. I always listen to them through my AirPod on the sofa here in the studio, and I have my notebook and I just make notes. And then I make notes, and then I make amends the next day, and I bounce them again. And the next day I listen and I make notes. And because if I'm sat in front of here, I'll twiddle forever. And I find that I'm way more focused if I have to do that bounce and listen through AirPods, which is kind of like where a lot of people, the sort of quality that people listen to it in as well. So it kind of lets me hear it in a place where a lot of people will hear it. But that process can get quite annoying quite fast, because it feels like Groundhog Day. Every day sitting down with a new page in my book, and this title of the song again, and it's like, okay, bring that down. Okay, yesterday I kind of messed that up, so I brought that down too much. But eventually the list of notes gets shorter and shorter until I go, I guess it's done.
Yeah, I do the same. I think that's a great way of doing it. And very much like you, I'll bounce it down and then I'll make notes as I'm listening to it, and I'll listen to it rather. I've got these terrible Bluetooth headphones which attenuate the high end, something chronic. Yeah. I'll listen to it on those, and then I've got a mono speaker I'll listen to it on, so I'll check out what the performance is when it's summed to mono, and then I'll listen to it in my car and all these different environments. And then off the back of that, because like you say there, if I'm sat there in front of it, I'll listen to it and I'll be tweaking a snare, and then suddenly I'm like, oh no, that's throwing that out of whack, and then I start moving stuff around.
I think so. I think you can do too much if you just edit like that and keep changing things. My wife's the same. I should shout out her, because she's heard, like you say, in the car, in the living room, through the TV speakers. She just hears, this album's not out yet, but she's heard it over 1,000 times, I'm quite sure, and she's never once complained about it. So I'm so lucky that she's so supportive with what we do. And yeah, I'm very grateful to her for putting up with it.
No, that's amazing, and it echoes what Brandon, chap I interviewed last week, 1=2, said the same thing. He said he's got a very forgiving partner who does the exact same. He's listened to the album over and over again.
There's a new part actually, is that my 2-year-old daughter Lucy, she started to pick up some of the hooks, and she starts to finish the choruses, and I go, okay, there's something here then. If this 2-year-old is listening, I mean, I know she will have also had to listen to this a lot of times, but if she starts finishing the end of a chorus before it's there, then I'll go, okay, that's as good. This must be a good one. This is working.
Yeah, 100%, definitely. It goes back to what I said earlier about having the barometer of someone who's not actually interested in it, but is actually humming it. So that kind of nicely moves on to like the last bit here. So the opportunity now to sort of plug the new album. So release date, when it's going to be released.
Yeah.
Sort of a brief. So who it's going to be released by as well. Release date. Who's released by, and also just like a brief summary of what the audience can expect.
Yeah, sure. So our next album is called Lost in Love, and it comes out on the 15th of July through Aztec Records, who are a phenomenal label that we wanted to work with. It was on our to-do list, find a way to work with Aztec, and we didn't even have to send them the fruit basket. They got in touch with us before we did that, so it was always meant to be, obviously, and we love working with them. There's some really fantastic artists. So yeah, Lost in Love is coming out through them, and it is an 11-track kind of ode to the highs and lows of love as told through the lens of 80s movies, I guess, without setting that side up of it too much, but knowing that many of the songs are kind of these stories that we tell, some of which are kind of action crime, and some of which are more breakfast clubby. But that's the idea. We are very lucky. There are a couple of guests on this one that we're thrilled to have on our last track, which is this big epic epilogue to the album, which calls back the title of the album and the previous song, Lost in Love. And that the opening dialogue in that is spoken by Janelle Elliott, who played Lara Croft in half of the classic Tomb Raider games. I'm a huge Tomb Raider fan, and lovely. I met her, and she was so lovely, and agreed to do this for us at the start. So that's a great thing for my list to tick off, that I've got Lara Croft essentially on one of our tracks on the album. And the end of that album, the end of that track, features saxophone by oh my gosh, I'm having a mind blank. That's not great. Thomas, I forget Thomas's surname. I'm so sorry, Thomas, from who played the saxophone on the majority of the Midnight song. So it's, that's a real like bucket list track for us.
Yeah,
I think it's Edinger. I'm so sorry, Thomas, but yeah. He does an amazing job, and that was brilliant for us. We've got the Midnight saxophonist on this last track on the album, and it starts with Lara Croft, so it's just kind of this dream come true for us, this one. So it's the first time that we're really presenting what the band is with Melissa, and half the tracks are led by Oliver and half of them are by Melissa, and there are a couple that are kind of co-lead vocals, and it's really great. It's a really nice flow to the album. And this sort of dynamic that is brand new to Pensacola Mist, and I can't wait for everyone to hear it.
No, I'm excited as well. I didn't realize you have the saxophonist on there as well. That's sort of.
We always said we wouldn't have saxophone on our tracks because no one does it better than the Midnight. But when you have the Midnight saxophonist, I think you can get away with it.
Well, yeah, this is it. I'm looking forward to this. So that's July the 15th.
Again, there are brilliant saxophonists in the genre. I've got to be careful with what I say there, because there absolutely are. But for us, we knew we couldn't do it. We didn't want to fake it with synth sax, and we didn't want to bring in someone that we might meet on the street here. And so we feel really thrilled and lucky to have Thomas on that track.
Amazing. So the audience listening, this is recorded prior to the album being released. So a link to the album will be put in the show notes for this, as with everything else that we've mentioned. So which leads on nicely to where can the audience find Pensacola Mist online?
Primarily, we're most active on Instagram, which is at Pensacola_Mist. Our website, PensacolaMist.com, has all the links to everything else. Our YouTube channel is criminally underviewed, if you ask me. we have very few subscribers, and all of our music videos are one-shot music videos that kind of like are very taxing mentally for us to come up with ideas that are interesting enough to keep without cutting away at the camera. So it would be nice if somebody watched those one day. So feel free to check those out if you'd like.
There you go, audience, go and do that.
But yeah, follow us on Instagram. You get everything really there. We're on Facebook and Twitter by search Pensacola Mist too, but Instagram is where we're most active and where you'll get most of our content on there. It'd be lovely to see some new people there too.
Yeah, I will put a link in the show notes to all of those there. And the YouTube is a cruel mistress, I find. I'm on YouTube myself, and I do put time and effort. I do put some time and effort into it, but the return on investment is so low.
We must do that because it's fun, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. I put out that's the reason I do it. I don't think I have to resign myself to the fact I'm never going to hit the billion or even a million.
Yeah. Well, who knows this time?
Well, this is it. You never know. It might suddenly spike one day. Occasionally, I get that. I've had more. I'm going off on a tangent now. I've had more views via shorts on YouTube than I have by long videos. Shorts, yeah. I'll post shorts, and then suddenly I'm like, oh wow, I've had like 2,000 views in the last day, and it's just a 15-second video.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas I release a new song, and there's 200.
Well, this is where we're terrible. We're not on TikTok. Sorry, we're everywhere but TikTok, and we should be on TikTok because that's where it happens. But I'm not there mentally yet, and hopefully I will be before it's too late. But right now, it's Instagram. I'm a millennial, and that's where I'm stuck at.
Yeah, TikTok is I you know what? I was reticent to do it, and my girlfriend was like, "No, you need to do TikTok," and I was like, because it's just my face a lot of the
There's
time.
some brilliant production tips though on TikTok. I've found, that sort of stuff you can do. That's been really useful because you get these really snappy hints that I've certainly taken on board when I have visited TikTok.
And I think, just in short, the key thing I've taken away from having created videos on there, the great thing is they don't have to be perfect. They can literally be just like you can swing your camera around your face, post it, point it at your computer, which takes away that. I think with YouTube, everything's got to be pristine and brilliant, whereas TikTok's not. Anyway, I digress. Dan, a huge thanks for joining me on this today.
No, thank you.
I've got 1,000 other questions I could probably go into, but I don't want to keep you too long on this Sunday. So no, a big thank you. I will endlessly plug the new album when it comes out, and
Thank you very much.
I'm really looking forward to it. So big thank you for joining me today, buddy.
No worries. Thank you very much. Take care.
Okay, I'll speak to you soon. Cheers, bud.
Hi, this is Carl from Neon Highway. My favourite episode of Inside the Mix podcast is episode 46 with Sunglasses Kid. Sunglasses Kid absolutely has his finger on the pulse of synth music and modern songwriting. In this episode, you'll hear him walk through his approach and his own experiences with creating a name for himself in the scene.
Ooh, slow your roll, folks. Before you go, don't forget to pick up your free producer growth scorecard. This simple tool will help you quickly progress as a songwriter and release more music. Get it for free at www.marcmatthewsproducer.com.